Welcome back to Metropolitan Community College's Hispanic Latino Heritage Month virtual programming. What a beautiful fall afternoon. We especially appreciate your joining us. My name is Barbara Velasquez, Coordinator of International Intercultural Education. The United States officially honors Hispanic Latino Heritage Month from September 15th through October 15th, recognizing and celebrating contributions of Hispanic and Latino champions who trace their roots to Spain, Mexico, Central America, South America, and the Spanish-speaking nations of the Caribbean. The 2022 national theme for Hispanic Heritage Month is Unidos, Inclusivity for a Stronger Nation. Today, we will watch a documentary with Film Festival Awards that demonstrate its global and social impact on audiences. Please stay with us as director Mirella Martinelli will be with us for Q&A after the viewing. And by the way, she was surprised that people as far away as Nebraska would care about Cuba. Let's show that we recognize the importance of understanding global issues by offering questions and creating a thoughtful discussion after the video. Your microphones and chat with other audience members are turned off. Send your questions at any time to moderator Barbara Velasquez. And watch the chat for a link to the online evaluation. With over 50 opportunities to participate this academic year, those who attend at least 20 programs and complete the evaluations with your contact information will be recognized. Set to the pulsating beats of Afro-Caribbean music, Frenemies examines the fraught relationship between the island nation of Cuba and the United States, blending 1950s archival footage with contemporary shots of Cuba's economic decay and vibrant culture. The film paints a vivid portrait of a nation fighting for survival against the world's longest running embargo. Presenting a critical perspective on both governments, Frenemies blends archival and contemporary footage, interweaving music with personal stories in a lively expose of the blatant violation of international law. The United Nations has voted almost 30 times for the embargo to be lifted. Frenemies presents a compelling argument to support this campaign. Okay, I was wishing right at the end that everybody's cameras were on so I could see if you were moving to the music. It's one that you really like to listen to the end. Let me introduce our director, but I also like to say that some or all of you may have experienced a little bit of a lip sync incongruity there. We're trying to figure that out, wondering if it is a internet problem, but still, I think you could really enjoy this beautiful, beautiful documentary. So let's learn about our director. Mirella Martinelli is an award-winning filmmaker, born and raised in Brazil. Living in Sarasota, Florida, Mirella edited Pool, which received 33 awards in international film festivals, including Best Foreign Language Short Film at the Orlando Film Festival, the Audience Award for Short Film at the Tampa Bay Gay and Lesbian Film Festival, and the jury's honorable mention at the Outshine Film Festival in Miami. Mirella Martinelli received the Sarasota Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota Ringling Tower Fund Grant and a Puffin Foundation grant to produce Frenemies. Mirella Martinelli worked as a film producer in Brazil and the United States, where she taught film at Columbia College Chicago and the University of Tampa. Mirella was awarded by American Cinema Editors, and her film Land of the Sea was funded by the Rockefeller and MacArthur Foundations. She worked in the Brazilian film industry for 3 decades as an editor, screenwriter, director, and producer. Mirella has received numerous awards, including Best Film, Best Director, and Best Editor. So welcome, Mirella. Thank you for joining us from Florida. And we are pleased that you're with us and want to say that we hope you survived the hurricane in safe fashion.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We did survive the hurricane here in Sarasota. The hurricane ended up making landfall a little bit south of us in Fort Myers, and the people there are suffering a lot in Naples, and a lot of people lost their homes. And believe it or not, the death toll in Florida is 105 and counting because of Ian. The death toll in Cuba of the same hurricane, it's one source reports 2 people, another source reports 3 people. And the reason for that is because over there, the government that, as you can see, I also have a lot of criticism to, is very active in evacuating people. And so there are a lot of things we can and should criticize about the Cuban government, but there's a lot of things that they also do right. In spite of that, if I may, I would like to start my conversation with you all today by saying that in Cuba, there's a lot of suffering going on right now because of Hurricane Ian having intensified problems that were already there, specifically in the energy sector. So even though they restored, when Ian hit, they lost, it was a countrywide blackout. All the country went without electricity, but they have restored the electricity to the whole country already, except for Pinar del Rio, which was the region that was where Ian made landfall. But the energy problem there has been becoming worse and worse, and we really need to help Cuba rebuild because many homes were destroyed. So I'm going to put in the chat. Let's see if this is going to work here. Yeah. So we have the U.S.-Cuba Normalization Coalition has a conference, and came everything together there, but you can see an email if you want to get more information from them, that info at Cuban Normalization. And they're putting out a petition, or a letter rather, to President Biden that Cuba must be allowed, at least for the next 6 months, to purchase the necessary construction materials to rebuild. So there's a link there where you can sign the letter, the Let Cuba Live information sign, and you can also donate online or by check. Any small dollar donation helps. So if anybody in this call, has it in their hearts to make a donation to Cuba and to sign the letter, please do that. They're in need.
Thank you so much for putting that in the chat. And I'd like to let the audience know that I will send that also out in a follow-up email. So we'll make sure you've got a couple opportunities to consider that. To get things started on the documentary, Mirella, tell us about what created your interest in directing Frenemies. And does the story have, everybody sees a story in a different way. What in particular does it mean to you? Or is there one theme that's more important to you?
Right. I think that, well, first let me tell you about what motivated me, and then what I think is a theme that is most important to me at the moment. What motivated me was, at first, this film was going to be about something else. When President Obama started warming relations and lifted the travel restrictions. Me living in Florida, it's just natural to go to Cuba. It's super close. My husband is a musician, wanted to go there. I've always wanted to go to Cuba. So we went. And with that first visit, there was a touristic, or, in research for music and understanding more of the Cuban culture. My first idea was to make a film that would help me understand and the audience understand what is the vision, the perceptions that US people have of Cuba before going to Cuba and after going, because I know that here people are really bombarded to really dislike and have prejudice against countries that have chosen other political ways of government, in this case, socialism or communism. And so I wanted to see how people were impacted by their visit when they see Cuba firsthand. So that was what first motivated me to write a project, and I got my first grant to make this film. But as that grant allowed me to research, I started researching, and the more I researched, the more I saw that this story could not be told without talking a lot about the embargo, because the embargo seeps in every aspect of the life of Cubans. And so, and that's when the focus of the film started shifting towards Cuba and the US embargo, which is, its title today, rather than perceptions of Cuba. And that's where also Frenemies comes into play, because of course Cuba has a lot of friends in US people. A lot of US people like Cuba and Cubans, but of course there's a lot of people who are enemies of Cuba and who impose this super cruel policy for more than 6 decades. And so it's very hard. So that's how I got to this film. And what I think is most important for me today is people like you. Thank you so much, Barbara, for inviting me, and for more than me, for bringing this film Frenemies to the audience. And thank you, people who are here and interested in watching and listening, because we need more people in this country to understand that the foreign policy that the US enacts in the world is not friendly, is not democratic, and that it depends on us who are living here, who are citizens here, and who vote here to change it. The people, for example, in Cuba are too weak. They are weakened by all this 6 decades plus of embargo to do anything about it. So it's us. This change needs to come from us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Remember, send your questions to moderator Barbara Velasquez. And we have a comment from the audience. As the safety in Cuban society is addressed, I read that all government vehicles must pick up hitchhikers. This tells me something about the safety within the society. Do you have any comments on the safety factors? I heard one thing that I jotted down was people began to become dehumanized in the 90s, and that the collective living had ended, as one of your speakers on the documentary was describing.
Yeah, I think a great example of the safety is the response to hurricanes. No, we have a governor here in Florida who I particularly find a fascist, who is priding himself by his response to this hurricane. I don't see why he's priding himself. I think a lot of people, because they didn't have enough here in Florida, didn't have enough notice, and sometimes didn't have means to evacuate. A lot of elderly people, and in Cuba, people are evacuated by the government. The government sends buses and government people to say, this is a mandatory evacuation. You need to get in here, and if you need, power because you need your oxygen, that's one of the reasons why a lot of people died here in Florida. We will take you to a place that there is a generator. So they're proactive. And the same in terms of health, in terms of the doctors knock on doors if people don't show up to their appointments. They go and they knock on people's doors, and they go to bring care to their homes. And so I think that there's a lot of safety that way. And on the other hand, now we're seeing a lot of things related to energy. The energy sector in Cuba is not giving them safety, because the energy sector in Cuba is falling apart. They have like really old energy, how do you say this, thermal energy plants that were built during Soviet times, and they don't have the capacity nor neither the money to bring it up to date. And so this is a problem, and a lot of times it ends up hitting the safety problem. Of course, as any other place that becomes poorer and poorer, it becomes more violent. So when I filmed this film, February 2019, to now, things already changed, because Cuba is in desperation, you know, and Cubans are in desperation. So that's one side of the story. Another side of the story is that there's a lot of political repression, and that's true too. And I don't think we should ignore this. Neither should we keep the embargo because of this. It's a mistake to keep the embargo because of this, because the United States has relations with countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, that are way more repressive with their population. And so that is not a good is a comparison, no, for us to have an idea, and not a good reason to keep an embargo, because the people who suffer the most, no. But for example, in I think it was in August, there was this lightning that struck some oil tanks in Matanzas. Matanzas is a city just northeast, I'm sorry, of Havana. And there was a fire there for days, and some firefighters died, which we know happens everywhere. But nowadays, people there, a lot of food is rotting because people don't have energy for their fridges, and people are eating rotten meat and rotten dairy. And of course, that's not safe, no? So there are many, many aspects to this. I think what the film was referring to safety in terms of, for example, if we compare to Orlando, there's way more crime, for example, in the city of Orlando in Florida than there is in Cuba, and in the United States in general, no? But safety encompasses so many aspects, no?
Right. Okay. In honor of time, I'm going to keep throwing out questions, and thank you, audience. Hello, Mrs. Martinelli. I noticed that there was a freedom of speech problem in Cuba, and I wanted to know more about that. Specifically, I wanted to know more about the purpose behind censoring the film about the revolutionary who didn't feel that he belonged to the communists or the capitalists. What is the image that the Cuban government wants to project on its people, and why doesn't the film fit within that image?
Right. So yeah, so that goes into this issue, no, that Cuba has. I think there's a lot of criticism all over the world in what we call here the First Amendment, right? So we feel protected by the First Amendment. I don't feel as much, and maybe a lot of people related to education don't feel that much in the United States either, with a lot of this movement in banning books, in not allowing a lot of things being taught, even in universities, but in public education in general. So we're suffering this problem right now in the United States too, to a lesser level, I would say. But this is a real problem in Cuba, you know, that the education and is all provided by, you know, the government, and that there is censorship, and there is not the First Amendment there. You know, they don't have such thing, but if they had, we would say that is very violated by the government there. So for example, they had the big protests in July last year. I think what was the exact number? A high number of people, like hundreds of people, I would say 600, I have it notes here, were jailed. And some of these people got sentences to up to 25 years in jail because they were protesting. The Cuban government affirms that that's because there is interference in trying to overturn the Cuban government. And that's true. USAID, that's what it does. It does try to instigate people in Cuba to go against their own government. And this is a foreign interference. So the situation is very complex and it's got a lot of sides to it. But this is a reality there. There is censorship. I think the government there struggles to give an image that they try to be accommodating to different expressions. So therefore, the film, in this case, Miguel Coyula's film, right, Nadia, ended up being shown. But like he says, at a time that nobody goes see it, not Nadia, Memories of Overdevelopment. Nadia was totally censored. So this is a reality there.
So coming from an office where study abroad was managed, I recall when people were super, super excited that travel to Cuba was opening up, right? Can you kind of briefly help the audience know how that, like, there were different categories. You started with certain things, and in the film it spoke of changing it to religious purposes only. Can you give us in a nutshell how the travel ban was lifted and where it is today?
Yeah, this keeps changing. So if you're gonna travel there, you have to see what the status is today. One of the things that Trump did when he was in presidency was limit the flights only to Havana and cut the flights to other cities, which is really difficult because, like I said, with the problem of energy problem, Cuba cannot buy, has very difficulty buying oil because of having been put in the list of state sponsors of international terrorism, which is an absurd thing that was done. Trump put again Cuba in that list. So, for example, those flights were going now from the United States only to Havana, so it was really difficult for people who wanted to reach other parts of Cuba. Transportation in the island is very difficult. As for the travel restrictions, there were still some ways you could go under Trump. Under President Biden, a lot of the restrictions for travel have been lifted. So it's much easier to go to Cuba nowadays. You have to check which category will work for you. Like, for example, for me, what worked was research, which was also true. But of course, I also did a little bit of tourism. I was there. And so you have to see which one works for you. But the problem is that this is a very small part of the sanctions. This is a part that we see more, because it affects us. But in reality, it's a very small part of the problem. So nowadays, people can travel. And in November, beginning of November, the Biden administration resumed the flight to different cities in Cuba, not just Havana, but it has not lifted a number of sanctions that it needs to lift, including this one of removing Cuba from the list of states sponsor of terrorism, because that's not even true.
Yeah, I specifically remember how excited Cuban family members were that they could, many years ago, for the first time, go and visit their families. And I'm not sure that most of us think about what it's like to get separated like that. We have another travel related question. In the film, there were people who said they were restricted from getting out by US rules. They said they felt like they had more of a communist regime in restricting their movement in the country. When you were there, did you feel you were restricted in the same way, or has that changed?
Right, when I was there, it was already, I actually went there the first time. It was already Trump, but it was still operating under Obama because Trump had not made the changes that he made a little later. The first time I was there March 2017, and I felt no restrictions at all. When I was there in 2019, I also didn't experience that. So I think that that had been in previous administrations, like the Bush administration, for example.
So this documentary, it just shows so much. It would take hours to really discuss even the beginnings of it. So I hope that you as audience members have begun to consider maybe some more research on what happened in Cuba, and you can get out there and look, because that's what happens when you see such a marvelous film like this. You can't get all the answers. There were many comments during the documentary that really can stick with us. And I think I'm going to end and then ask you a final question with: the US cannot continue to be policemen of the world. I found that very interesting statement, just to leave and think about that. And that it is just mandatory that a country has sovereignty over itself, which we can see that Cuba has lost, if it ever had it, because of its position. So, Mirella, do you have any final thoughts for our audience? I know this has gone quickly, but I want to honor our commitment to the 30-minute time.
Sure. Yes, thank you. Well, I want to say some things about the comments you made, about the United States being the policeman. And maybe I would add, and at the same time, thief of the world, because at the same time, the United States has been a neo-colonizer, for example, of my country, Brazil. And with this neo-colonization, there's a lot that gets literally stolen from a country. For example, right now, what is happening is the United States is aiming to get Brazilian water. And the whole Amazon basin has been bought by a lot of US people, rich people and companies. So, and also in terms of being the policeman yeah, that's the way Miguel Coyulla put that, right, in the film. But I see it more like a strong military force that is acting in a way that is just so against what we need the most at the moment, which is address climate change. War is the most polluting thing and the most global warming thing that we can think of. And unfortunately, the United States promotes a lot of war, sells a lot of weapons. So we really need to think about that. And we really need to, as US citizens, take charge of, be sure who we're voting for. And sometimes voting is a weak form also of participation in a democracy, because that happens only once in a while. If you are going to really participate, you got to participate more. You have to put a concerted effort before, during, and after election to change here. We are in a very dangerous moment where you see this kind of policy, for example, against our neighbors, our Cuban neighbors, just 90 miles away from where I live, or from Florida. A lot of this authoritarianism is starting to happen within, not starting, right? I'm saying starting to happen, no. It's getting stronger within the United States against its own citizens. And I said starting, and I apologize for that, because I'm saying that coming from the point of view of a white person, because this authoritarianism has been in this country very fiercely against Black people, against Indigenous people, and now against Latinos that are immigrants here too. And so we need to take charge. We need to be strong citizens and really affect change here. I ask you all if you can please support Cuba, please sign a letter to President Biden to lift sanctions at least for 6 months, for them to rebuild the over 4,000 homes that have been completely destroyed. and they have no way of getting construction materials. They have no way of making deals with banks because of being in this terrorist list. And this international banking, as you saw in the film, is a huge problem, no? So I would say there's a lot to be addressed, and we can't be naive. You know, I talk to a lot of people here say, oh yeah, our great president was Kennedy. I'm sorry, people. Maybe he was great for some people here, but I'm sorry, he wasn't a great president for the rest of the world. Kennedy created a lot of war, you know? So we need to start seeing the United States, you know, in a more realistic way. That's what I would ask you all to do. You know, leave your patriotism in the drawer and take a look of what you of the reality of it, you know, of the reality of all peoples who live here and who live in the rest of the world too.
All right. Thank you for such a good directive and message to end our program today, Mirella. I trust that today's presentation makes it even more evident that we all need to understand global issues, perspectives, and actions of the U.S. government, especially the significance of Cuba in the U.S. political scene over time. It's really amazing for us, Mirella, to have a director with us for its film discussion. We appreciate your taking the time, especially at this important time. I didn't imagine that we would get into civic responsibility with this presentation, but I thank you for that, because we always we don't try to take one side or the other, but we do want to encourage people to be civically responsible and do just what you're saying, to work, to vote, but do more than vote. Be there all the time. And audience members, you've responded so well to demonstrate that everyone benefits by learning about issues around the globe. Thank you for honoring this opportunity to have Mirella with us and share her experiences and deep perspectives on her time in Cuba. We really, really appreciate that. Thank you, Joe, for your help today. Please put up, I see you've got the slide for the evaluation. If that could be there we go. It's right there. We really want everybody to complete your evaluation, and reminding you, attending and completing 20 evaluations with your contact information will qualify you for recognition during the year. And then finally, tomorrow, we have a program coming up. We'll be at 6:15 p.m. And you'll have the honor of meeting Mr. Carlos Molina Vital, who is an Andean Studies doctorate in linguistics candidate. He's working on his dissertation. He will be sharing with us, speaking of Indigenous people and rights, Quechua, which is one of the languages of the Inca people, beyond the Inca Empire into the 21st century. And I think it's good, you'll find if you can attend tomorrow night, this is going to be a different presentation than you may have seen before about languages and cultures of people that speak a certain language. I'm really excited to hear from Carlos Molina Vital, and I look forward to having you join us at 6:15 tomorrow night. Bye, everybody.